Hello, this is Rabbi David Abramson. This week's Torah portion is Parashat B'midbar, the first portion in the book of B'midbar, known in English as the Book of Numbers. The Torah portion begins with Moses taking a census of the Israelites, hence the English name of this book of the Bible, Numbers. But Parashat B'midbar deals with other organizational details of the Israelite community. At this point in the story, the Israelites have left Egypt, have arrived at Mount Sinai, have received the commandments at Mount Sinai, and now are in the midst of what we know will be a period of 40 years of wandering in the desert. During this time, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, will be both the geographical center of the Israelite community as well as the spiritual center of the Israelite nation. The Mishkan, built at the time of Moses, is the precursor to the temple in Jerusalem that will be built by King Solomon many years later. This portable temple is what the Israelites carried with them throughout their wandering in the desert for those 40 years, and then for many years once they are establishing themselves in the Holy Land. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, is the focus of the religious life of the Israelites. There, sacrifices will be given every morning and every afternoon, special sacrifices for Shabbat, special sacrifices for this holiday and that holiday, special sacrifices for this circumstance and for that circumstance, and so on. And so maintaining the Mishkan, disassembling it, packing it up, and transporting it when the Israelites are traveling, that's central in the life of the Israelites. Moses' brother Aaron and his 4 sons are assigned the job of being the first Kohanim, the first priests in the ancient religion of Israel. It is they who perform the sacrificial rituals that are central in Israelite religion. It is they who make use of the physical stuff of the sacrificial system. The utensils for preparing and offering the sacrifices, the altars on which the sacrifices are offered, the menorah, the 7-branch candelabrum, which of course we know from later in our history, from the Hanukkah story, and of course the Aron, the Ark of the Covenant. All of these physical trappings of the sacrificial system are central in Israelite religion and are the purview of the Kohanim. But the Kohanim need help in maintaining the physical trappings of the sacrificial system, and especially in transporting it. During their time in the desert, the Israelites were not traveling all of the time. They would sojourn in this area or in that area for a while, and then eventually it would be time to move on and to settle in another area in the desert. When it's time to move on, the Kohanim would pack up the physical trappings of the sacrificial system, and then other people would be assigned the job of carrying, of transporting those objects and that equipment. And who were the people who would do this transporting? Different families within the tribe of Levi, which of course is the tribe which Moses and Aaron and Miriam come from. One particular Levitical family has a unique role, and that is the transporting of the most holy objects, the things that I mentioned a few moments ago. That job is assigned to the descendants of Kahat. Kahat himself was Moses' grandfather, and so it is Moses' distant cousins, B'nai Kahat, the descendants of Kahat, who will play a particularly unique role in transporting and maintaining the physical trappings of the sacrificial system. The B'nai Kahat, the descendants of Kahat, are sometimes referred to in English as the Kohatites. Here are a few verses that describe part of the role of the B'nai Kahat, of the Kohatite families. And as you will see, these verses raise some intriguing questions. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe v'el Aharon lemor. Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Al tachritu et shevet mishpachot hakahati mitoch haleviim. Do not let the group of Kohathite clans be cut off from the Levites. V'zot asu lahem. Do this with them. V'chayu v'lo yamutu. That they may live and not die. V'yishtam et kodesh hakodashim. When they approach the most sacred objects. Aharon uvanav yavo'u. Let Aaron and his sons go in. Remember, Aaron and his sons are the Kohanim, the priests. Let Aaron and his sons go in. V'samu otam ish al avodato ve'el masa'o. And assign each of them to his duties and to his burden. V'lo yavo'u, but let not the Kohathites go inside, lir'ot kivala et hakodesh, to see the holy things as they are being covered, vametu, lest they die. So the Kohanim, the priests, pack up the physical trappings of the sacrificial system, and once those objects are placed in their containers and are covered up, only then may the Bnei Kahat go in and start to transport those objects. But they're not allowed to look at them lest they die. So the question is, what is it about the physical trappings of the sacrificial system that are dangerous for the Bnei Kahat? Why is it that the Kohathite families are not allowed to look at these objects? Why is it that they must be packed up and covered before Bnei Kahat can come in and transport them? A rabbinic source known as Midrash Rabbah contains two explanations in one long passage. One explanation from Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat, and the other explanation from Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman. First, the explanation of Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat. This passage begins by quoting one of the verses that we just saw. Al tachritu et shevet mishpachot hakati mitoch haleviim. Do not let the group of Kohathite clans be cut off. Ella kishem shamar Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat kishem Rabbi Yosei ben Zimra. Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat said in the name of Rabbi Yosei ben Zimra, mitoch shehayata ha'esh yotzeit v'shafa v'to'anei ha'aron hayu mit ma'atim. Because fire came out of the ark, the bearers of the ark were afraid that they would be diminished. When did fire come out of the ark? Remember that story in the book of Leviticus in which two of Aaron's sons are mysteriously killed when they come into the tabernacle and offer Eish Zarah, offer foreign fire on the Mizbeach, on the altar. And fire shoots out and kills them. This story suggests that the holy objects in the Mishkan are potentially dangerous. They killed two of the sons of Aaron, and so the Bnei Kahat, the Kohathite families, are afraid that these things may be dangerous for them as well. Rabbi Elazar's explanation continues. Now we're on line 4 in this passage. V'hayu kol echad ve'echad ratzim. Because of the potential danger, each one of them would run away. Ze notel et hashulchan, v'ze notel et hamenorah, v'ze notel et hamizbachot. This one would take the table, this one would take the menorah, this one would take the altars. Uvorchin min ha'aron, and they would flee from the ark, mipnei shahaya mazikan, since it might strike them down. Rabbi Elazar's explanation continues. Because the Kohathite families were afraid to transport the ark, and because instead they would rush to carry this object or that object, avoiding the ark, here on line 8, v'haya ha'aron ki'ilu mitbazeh, the ark would thereby be slighted. V'haya ha'kadosh baruch hu ko'es aleihem, and the Holy Blessed One, God, would be angry with them. V'shuv hayu mit kalim, and they would be destroyed. So that was the danger, that by avoiding the ark, the Bnei Kahat would, in a sense, insult the ark, and that would anger God. And that's why they were afraid that they might be destroyed. Therefore, line 11, Amar lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe ul Aharon. So the Holy Blessed One said to Moses and Aaron, Asu lahem takana livnei Kahat. Institute a precautionary measure for the sons of Kahat. Kedei shelo yikaratu min haolam. So that they would not be cut off from the world. Shelo yihyu manichin uvorchim, to ensure that they would not leave the ark and flee. Al tachritu et shevet v'gomer. Therefore the verse says, do not let the group of Kohathite clans be cut off. Ella yavo Aaron vanav, rather let Aaron and his sons go in. V'samu otam ish al avodato v'el masao, and assign each one of them to his duties and to his burden. Kedei shelo yuchlu lehitchalef me'avodah la'avodah umimasa l'masa, so that they would not be able to transfer from one service to another and from one burden to another. Hadahu dichtiv zot asu lahem v'chayu v'gomer. Thus it is written, do this with them that they may live. So Rabbi Elazar's explanation is that because the Bnei Kahat were afraid of handling the ark and were inclined to rush to transport other objects, and in so doing ignore the ark and in a sense insult the ark, because of this potential problem, God instructed Moses and Aaron to set up this precautionary measure. Have the Kohanim cover up these holy objects, and only then would the Bnei Kahat come in to transport them. Now the explanation of Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman Amar, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman said, Chas v'shalom lo hayu Bnei Kahat manichin et ha'aron v'ratzin l'shulchan u'menorah. Heaven forfend that the sons of Kahat should leave the ark and run to carry the table and the menorah. That wasn't the problem. Ella afal pi shemit ma'atin hayu notnim nafsham al haron. Rather, even though they were potentially diminished by the perceived danger of the ark, they were ready to give their lives for the ark. V'im came lama haya mazhir alehem al tachritu et shevet v'gomer. If so, what was the meaning of the admonition, do not let the group of Kohathite clans be cut off? Ela mipnei shahayu yod'in shekol mi sheto'en ba'aron secharo merubah. They knew that whoever carried the ark merited greater reward. V'hayu manichim et hashulchan v'hamenorah v'hamizbachot. All would then leave the table and the menorah and the altars, v'chulan ratzim la'aron litol sachar, and come running to the ark in order to reap a greater reward. Rabbi Shmuel's explanation up to this point is that it's not that the Bnei Kahat were afraid of handling the ark, and so were assigning themselves other burdens, rushing to carry this other object or that other object. It's just the opposite. The Bnei Kahat so revered the ark that they would run around, perhaps competing with each other for the opportunity to carry the ark, and at the same time ignore the other things that needed to be transported. Umitoch kach hayazeh meriv omer anito ein kan. Because of this, one would argue and say, I will carry the ark here. V'zeh meriv omer anito ein kan. And this one would argue and say, I will carry the ark here. Umitoch kach hayu nohagin b'kalot rosh. Because of this, they would behave disrespectfully, running around, competing with one another for the privilege of transporting the ark. That's not what they're supposed to be doing, running around competing with one another. That's disrespectful behavior. V'hayetah shechina poga'at bahem. And the Shekhinah, the divine presence, would be insulted by this disrespectful behavior. Amar ha'Elohim leMoshe. For this reason, God said to Moses, Aseh lahem takana kedei shelo yitkalu min ha'olam. Institute a precautionary measure that they should not be destroyed from the world. Al tachritu v'gomer. Do not let them be cut off, as the verse said. Ela yisadaru otam al avodatam v'al masa'am. Rather, arrange them according to their duties and their burdens. Shelo yarivu ze im zeh. So they should not quarrel with one another, so that they should not engage in the disrespectful behavior of quarreling about who carries what. Rather, Moses and Aaron should make the assignments. These people will carry the ark, these people will carry the menorah, etc. Asa lahem Moshe takana. So Moses instituted this precautionary measure, ela shahiyu merivin zeh keneged zeh, because they were fighting with one another. Zeh omer ani to'en ba'aron. This one saying, I will carry the ark. V'zeh omer lav ela ani to'en. And this one saying, no, I will carry it. V'lo haya yodea echad mahu kavua lo mahu masa'o. And nobody knew what was his assignment and his burden. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, therefore the Holy Blessed One said, V'hayu Aharon uvanav nichnasin v'notnim l'chol echad v'echad tu'uno. Let Aaron and his sons come and give each one his burden. Shene'amar Aharon uvanav yavo'u v'samu otam v'gomer. As it is written, let Aaron and his sons go in and assign each of them to his duties and his burden. So Rabbi Elazar's explanation is that because the Bnei Kahat feared handling the Aron, handling the ark, the result would be the chaos and the disrespectful behavior of running around trying to assign themselves different burdens. And so Rabbi Elazar's explanation was that the Kohanim should assign the jobs to avoid that disorganized and disrespectful behavior. Rabbi Shmuel's explanation is just the opposite. Because they so revered the ark, they might be inclined to run around competing with one another for the privilege of transporting the ark, and that too would result in chaotic and disrespectful behavior. And so for that reason, according to Rabbi Shmuel, the Kohanim would assign the specific tasks to the specific members of the Kohathite clan. Now let's go to the 19th century to see another explanation, this from the pen of Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. It is stated above that the sons of Kahat were only given the vessels to carry after they had been covered. It was forbidden for them to be present when Aaron and his sons were engaged in covering them. They shall not go in to see the holy things as they are being covered. We suggest that the reason for this was that the holy vessels should not be regarded simply as material articles of use. The people should realize their inner symbolic significance. The Levites were charged with understanding the symbolic nature of the vessels that had been entrusted to their care. Had they kept their gaze directed on the holy vessels while they were being covered, this inner perception of their sacred purpose would have suffered, and they would have profaned their task. The potential danger, according to Rabbi Hirsch, is that the Kohathite families might become a little too familiar with the physical objects that they are tasked with transporting, and lose sight of the fact that all of these objects, the altar, the menorah, the other utensils, and certainly the ark itself, are religious symbols. The potential danger, according to Rabbi Hirsch, is that the Kohathite families might become too familiar with the objects that they are tasked to transport, and they might lose sight of the special holiness of these objects. In Judaism, there is a tradition of distancing ourselves from things that are particularly holy, and in some cases, not even looking at certain things because of their special holiness. One example that comes to mind, even in contemporary Judaism, is the custom related to the ritual known as duchening, the ritual of contemporary Kohanim, the descendants of the ancient priests, blessing the rest of the Jewish community. In some congregations, this is done just on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In some communities, it's done on all of the major festivals. In Israel, the custom is to do this every Shabbat, and in Jerusalem, the custom is to do it every day. The Kohanim bless the rest of the Jewish community with different degrees of frequency. The ritual is colorful and exotic. The Kohanim stand before the congregation, extend their hands, and utter the words of Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing. And what are we supposed to be doing as we stand in shul being blessed by the Kohanim? We're supposed to not look at the Kohanim. And so different people have different traditions. Some cover their eyes with their hand, some pull their talit over their head, some just close their eyes. Whatever is your tradition, it's all about not looking at the Kohanim while they're blessing us because of the special sanctity of the Kohanim and of the ritual that they're performing. And we see that theme in operation here in Rabbi Hirsch's explanation. The Kohathite families are required to come in to transport the ark and the other trappings of the sacrificial system. But these families are allowed to come in to do their work of transporting these objects only after the Kohanim have covered them, because to look directly at those objects might result in the Levitical families losing their reverence for these particularly holy objects. That's the explanation of Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. Now let's turn our attention to the explanation of a 17th century Italian rabbi by the name of Moshe Chaifetz. I believe that the text contains a warning against the temptation of high office, and the cure, humility. The sons of Kahat were in danger of becoming victims of pride and vanity as a result of the privilege of carrying the ark. They were not allowed to carry the ark until Aaron and his sons had covered the holy things, so that they should realize that they too were subordinated to something higher than themselves. The prohibition of touching the holy things was designed to disinflate their pride. They should not imagine that they were in complete control and become overproud. This was the burden of the sons of Kahat. Their pride was meant to suffer by this burdensome prohibition, but it was ultimately meant for their benefit, that they should not be cut off and render themselves liable to the death penalty for lording it over their brethren. And so, according to Rabbi Chaifetz, the purpose of this arrangement was to protect the Bnei Kahat from the danger of pride and vanity and privilege, to help them cultivate humility in the face of the great privilege that they are given. The final interpretation that I want to share with you comes from a troubling and yet instructive story from the Talmud. It deals with a couple of Kohanim, a couple of priests, not with Bnei Kahat, but as you'll see, the lesson is the same and certainly can be applied to our understanding of this arrangement regarding the Kohathite families. Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught, Ma'aseh b'shnei Kohanim shahayu shnehem shavim v'ratzin v'olin b'keves. An incident occurred where there were two Kohanim who were equal as they were running and ascending the ramp. Why are these two Kohanim running up the ramp? Well, in addition to offering the sacrifices and performing the sacrificial rituals, there were certain housekeeping matters that were the purview of the Kohanim, and as such were holy activities and activities for which some Kohanim competed with other Kohanim. And one of those tasks was Trumat Hadeshen, removing the ashes from the altar from the previous day's sacrifices. Well, in this story, these two young Kohanim are competing with each other. They're running up the altar, each hoping that he will be the first one to get to the Mizbeach, so he will be able to remove the ashes from the previous day's sacrifices. Kadam echad mehem letoch arba amot shel chavero. One of them reached the 4 cubits before his colleague. One of them approached the Mizbeach, the altar, before his colleague got there. And what did the other one do? Natal sakin v'takalo belibo. He took a knife and stabbed the other Kohen in the heart. Well, now the story is not simply a story of competition between two Kohanim, but competition that has dire effects. The one who was losing the race to get to the altar took a knife and stabbed the other Kohen in the heart. Ba'aviv shel tinok u'mutza'o kishehu mifarper. The father of the boy, the father of the young Kohen who had been stabbed, came and found that he was still convulsing. He sees that his son is not dead, he's wounded. Perhaps he's going to be dead very soon, but he's not dead yet. Amar harehu kaparatchem. And he said, may my son's death be an atonement for you. So now this tragic story presents a poignant detail. The heartbroken father of the wounded Kohen, who recognizes that his son is near death, turns to the man who stabbed his son and says, perhaps my son's death will be an atonement for you. Line 7, the father continues, Va'adayin b'ni mifarper, but my son is still convulsing. He's not dead yet. V'lo nitma'a sakin. Therefore, the knife, which is in his body, has not become ritually impure through contact with a corpse. So apparently, there's good news, at least in the mind of the father. A dead body is a source of tum'ah, of ritual impurity, which of course must be avoided, related to all of these sacrificial rituals. And so the father of this wounded young man presents what I guess at the moment he considers good news. My son is not yet dead. Therefore, the knife, which is still inside his body, has not become ritually impure. If the knife is removed from his body before he dies, then that knife will not be tainted by ritual impurity. It will still be usable for sacrificial rituals. So that's good news. Wait a minute, where is this story taking us? A man whose son has been stabbed and who is now close to death is almost rejoicing in the good news that since he's not yet dead, his body is not yet the source of ritual impurity. It sounds ridiculous, at least to you and me, and apparently it sounds ridiculous to the Talmud itself, which concludes the story with the following observation here on the last line. Lilamedcha shekasha aleichem toharat kelim yoter mishvichut damim. This incident comes to teach you that the ritual purity of utensils was of more concern to them than the shedding of blood. In this preposterous piece of the story, the father is losing sight of the tragedy of his son's impending death, asserting instead that there is one piece of good news, namely the fact that the knife is not tainted by ritual impurity. What's wrong with this picture? People should be more concerned about shedding of human blood rather than the ritual purity of a knife. And so, as I entitled this passage, this little story is about the danger of disorder and of misplaced priorities. And that's a lesson that we can derive from this little Talmudic story and apply to many areas of our lives. So we began with a puzzling restriction placed on Bnei Kahat, the Levitical family assigned the task of transporting the holiest objects in the Mishkan. And we saw numerous interpretations that yielded some important lessons. Elazar ben Pedat taught us of the danger of fearing the ark too much, of avoiding the responsibility of transporting this holy object, and the disorganization and disrespect that might result. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman taught us of the danger of revering the ark too much, of neglecting the responsibility of transporting the other trappings of the sacrificial system, and the disorganization and disrespectful behavior that might result from that extreme. Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch taught us of the danger of becoming too familiar with the physical trappings of the sacrificial system, of losing sight of their sanctity. Moshe Chafetz taught us of the danger of pride, vanity, and privilege, and the humility that the Kohathite families were challenged to cultivate. And finally, that Talmudic story reminds us of the potentially tragic implications of misplaced priorities. These lessons were applicable not only to the Levitical families that were assigned these tasks thousands of years ago. These lessons are also applicable in our own Jewish lives as well. Shabbat Shalom.